Hey, it's Scott. Two things before we get started this week. We asked for your donations last week, and some of you gave, and I want to just thank those folks specifically. I want to call out by name Anne, Dana, and Julie in Issaquah. Thank you all so much for your generosity. Every dollar is a vote for sound politics when you give at kuow.org/politics. It's a vote for our podcast and what it does. And I think, being connected to what's happening in your community, our community. If you meant to join those lovely people I named and the other folks who give and who sustain us monthly, but you forgot or procrastinated, relatable, but you can still join them, kuow.org/politics. And sign up. Please do it if you like what you hear in this feed. Okay, second thing. Questions. We asked for your questions this week in the feed. You answered in the form of a question. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, we got such good questions that they're going to take a little time to answer. But in the meantime, send us more. Tell your friends. We know you have more questions. Sound politics at kuow.org. Go to the show notes if you don't want to type it into your address line on your email app. You could call us even. That'll be in the show notes too. 206-221-0511. It's one tap. Okay, ready? It's time for Sound Politics. You're listening to Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone. Libby Denkmann's out this week. And I'm just going to admit it. I am overwhelmed. It started around the inauguration, and it's just this week I fell off the boogie board. I'm body surfing in the waves. Actually, I'm not even body surfing anymore. I'm just getting tossed about in the news. It started a couple days ago between when Trump signed an executive order that would, if it stood up in court, huge if, totally overhaul our election system and many other states, continued with reported cuts to COVID funding and state health services and detainments of activists, not to mention Signal group chats with J.D. Vance and Joe Kent. But when I am overwhelmed, there's just one place I look to make sense of the world: email newsletters. They take the wave of news and sluice and sieve it. They spill it out into less than 2,000 words, bullet points.
Less than 1,000 at Axios, okay?
Oh, okay.
We're here to bail you out, Scott.
Thank you. That's right. Two people writing two of the best newsletters in the PNW. Bullet points, emojis, smart brevity, photos of dogs. Sitting right across from me, Melissa Santos, you write the Axios Seattle newsletter. Hi.
Hey. I already put my plug in, okay?
Yeah, you
Sorry if you have to cut that. I apologize.
I think we're keeping it. Paul Queary, you write the Washington Observer newsletter.
I'm happy to be with you, Scott.
And we're going to discuss the big story of the week, but also what we missed because we were overwhelmed this week. So let's talk first about the big story. Signal group chat where the Vice President of the United States, the Defense Secretary, and many others, including Joe Kent, the yet-to-be-confirmed director of the National Counterterrorism Center and a well-known name in Washington right-wing politics, discussed bombing Houthi rebels in Yemen, texting potentially classified information via Signal, a messaging app, a texting app. So we know about all this because, of course, as everyone listening to this has probably heard, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic was somehow added to the group chat, which raises huge questions about how secure any of these war plans are being kept and maybe basic competency. I'm not sure. And also, I bring it up because we saw a little bit of the behind-the-scenes Joe Kent, I think, because of this. He said there's no reason the situation won't have changed in Yemen in a month. We could wait. And from what we know of Kent, I'm kind of curious. Paul, you've covered him a lot. Is he, is this maybe emblematic of him emphasizing restraint behind the scenes when it comes to international interventions?
Well, as longtime followers of politics will remember, Joe Kent lost his wife in one of our expeditionary wars. And he is something of an isolationist in terms of putting kind of boots on the ground. And I think and if you read that Signal exchange, there's some real kind of reservations around like traditional alliances with Europe and sort of where the U.S. should put its military might. And I think Kent's probably definitely part of that wing, and that was reflected there. I mean, for me, I think the unanswered question here, and I assume it's because it's like a matter of classified government technology, is like, how bad does the technology that they're supposed to use for this suck? Because that has to be why this conversation's on Signal.
There must be some government service where you're supposed to communicate these things, and it probably is impossible to use.
I think it's a little bit laziness, okay? I mean, it's probably a pain in the butt to go into your little secret room with your secret computer, but like, they drill this into the heads of people in the military. I worked briefly for the Department of Defense for like a year or two, and it's like every other day there's training about this stuff. So I'm kind of like, I don't feel bad that it's, I just don't.
That you added the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic into your group chat.
And that's I think that is really the key flaw there. I mean, because Signal is sort of famously secure, but if this were a government classified system, then the editor of The Atlantic just doesn't have an account, and so it can't happen, right?
Okay. I want to move on because that was the big story that's eating up all our attention. But we asked you all to bring sort of your unreported local stories. And Melissa, I want to ask you first. We're going national, local, okay? Some high and medium profile deportations have been coming through our backyard at the Tacoma Northwest Detention Center, which has been a focus of Washington Democrats for years. So it's a federal facility. It's the fourth largest immigration detention center in the country. And we saw a Welsh tourist detained at the Canadian border who spent 19 days there before, being flown back to the UK in chains. Her parents said, they compared it to Hannibal Lecter. Washington residents have been detained there too. UW medicine employee and green card holder named Llewellyn Dixon is there now. She was visiting family in the Philippines, but was detained on the way back because of an embezzlement. Well, her lawyer thinks an embezzlement conviction from 2001. She was fined and went to a halfway house. Then, as far as we know, hasn't had any charges since. There's a farm worker activist and union leader from Skagit County named Alfredo Juarez Zeffirino, whose supporters say is not being held for any crime, but for his activism. All this at the Tacoma Detention Center. And state lawmakers have been trying to, for some time. Melissa, what have they been trying to do?
Well, they've been trying to get in there, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, the law they passed a couple of years ago now in 2023 was supposed to have the state be able to at least inspect, even though it's a federal facility. Because there's also been lots of allegations that people aren't treated well in there. That's been an ongoing thing, and activists have raised that as an issue for a while. And so the state wanted to get in there. They tried closing it before. They've looked at things like that. There's been pushes to do that, but they kind of settled on, let's just try for some oversight, right? But then a judge said, you can't just single out this one federal facility. And so their law got struck down. And now they're trying again, basically, and through a few different means. Our state attorney general's office is trying to overturn the court decision that struck down the prior law. And then now they're kind of saying, okay, we got this other bill that it wouldn't just apply to this one facility. It's not singling these guys out. We're looking at expanding the definition a little. It might include some other small facilities. I still need to talk to them about who else would be actually included in this. It's still clearly they're trying to target the detention center, but they're trying to address whatever that idea that they're kind of singling out this group, which is privately owned, right? So it's sort of like this idea that maybe you can't single out one company, Geo Group, I think, in this case. So they're trying to get at it in the legislature and through the courts.
Yeah, federal facility, but for-profit private company running it. And Melissa, that's not the only bill you brought to our super secret group chat where we share not war plans but undercover stories.
It's super secret because we're gonna publish stories about them in a few hours, right? So.
I know, right? So look to the newsletter for that story, the Axios Seattle newsletter for that story on immigration soon in the Northwest Detention Center. We also talked about Olympia potentially passing a rent cap on the show last week. We missed out on another potential rent law that could go into effect, and that's what you wanted to talk about. What are lawmakers trying to do to change the rental
this
market?
Is going to have to go back in time like a couple years. Life was different, but there was a big ProPublica investigation. That's a nonprofit newsroom that was looking at this company that sort of helps landlords around the country gather information and share information about what they charge for rents, their vacancy rates, stuff like that. And then it has this algorithm that then recommends pricing to all these landlords. And this is RealPage is the main one that does this. There's probably another company or two that does this as well, but they're the big player. And, in Seattle, for instance, there's been some allegations that this is driving up rents here and elsewhere because basically the landlords aren't competing anymore is what the allegation is. So the Department of Justice has sued RealPage. This was the old administration's Department of Justice. I guess I should be clear.
The Biden administration.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they sued over this. Washington joined a lawsuit over it as well. And now there's a bill in the legislature that would say you just can't do this. It doesn't say it's for RealPage. Same thing. Like we're not targeting this one company. The whole plethora of whoever wants to do this. You can't take data from multiple landlords and then use it to recommend rent pricing to multiple other landlords is basically what the bill says. And it's definitely targeted at RealPage. That's what they're talking about. So, there's the White House Economic Advisors Group. I forget the exact acronym, found that this charged renters $3.8 billion more across the country maybe in 2023. And that was, again, prior administration. Maybe there'd be different findings today with a different group of advisors. But there's some evidence that maybe it does cause landlords to charge slightly higher rents because they're like, oh, that's what everyone else is doing. Okay, all right.
Paul, what have you been following this? Do you think it's going to pass?
Yeah, we followed this, and I think that there's a lot of lawmakers, probably on both sides of the aisle, kind of recoil from that. I mean, it's kind of feels like some sort of automated collusion. In general, sort of renters' rights are kind of on the rise in the legislature. I mean, the rent cap bill that you were just referencing cleared the Senate Housing Committee this week, and that's where it died in the last few years.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
right.
that's emblematic of its chances. I'd be surprised. I don't think RealPage has a lot of friends in Olympia.
Yeah. I just was on the phone with the bill sponsor, and it passed out of committee yesterday. This is the RealPage bill, I should be clear. Passed out of committee yesterday. Looked like no amendments, which is kind of surprising to me because I figured there'd be someone kind of tweak it to make sure it's like you don't encompass realty groups and stuff, But yeah, it looks like it's going to make at least the next legislative deadline here.
All right, Paul, it's your turn to share your under the radar gems. And it's related because, as you told our producer, it's hard to make new laws when you don't actually know that you'll have any money to invest in them. And I'm, of course, talking about a topic that has definitely been on our radar, the state budget. But your story is a little bit more about how we got to this point with the budget, a giant deficit to fix and competing plans on how to do it. So what got us here?
In many respects, the budget crisis is a the legislature's own creation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they did, on purpose is probably a little too direct, but I think they did it in the knowledge that they could wind up in this situation, and that would drive a big push for tax increases and a crisis that some people won't want to waste.
And this big situation again being, we've said it so many times, $12 to $15 billion in the hole at the state level.
And a big chunk of that is newly negotiated agreements between the state and the various public employee unions. And this dates back to my first stint covering Olympia, which is more than 20 years ago. Back in the day, the state employee unions didn't really have the right to bargain collectively, and they had to deal directly with the legislature. And then they got that changed during the Gary Locke administration, and now those agreements are negotiated between the administration, the governor, and the state employees unions. And the latest round of those were negotiated by the Inslee administration on their way out last year. Now, the problem here is that there's a lot of actual politics that gets into this because the Washington Federation of State Employees is one of the biggest donors to the Democratic majorities, and they are in solidarity with the other two major public sector labor unions that are the other two biggest donors to those PACs. And so, just not funding the contracts is that's a hard political lift, even if the people who are in the majority in the legislature didn't believe firmly in collective bargaining, which they do. And so they're kind of stuck with this situation where the governor has proposed furloughs. I mean, he wants to uphold the contracts, but he also wants to, force folks to take some paid days off. And this is, at the same time that the legislature is considering major groundbreaking new tax increases and also really significant cuts especially to healthcare.
Yeah, it's I'm glad you brought this up because it brings up this really important dynamic in Olympia that we don't talk about a ton, where the Democrats who run the place count the unions and the money that comes from the unions as some of their biggest political supporters. And so they, when they're considering cuts, it's a really hard decision for them to decide to cut salaries or not, fulfill the agreements that they made with the unions.
And most of the money in the state government goes to pay human beings to go to work in various places.
There are some genuine retention concern issues, like with some of the healthcare workers and stuff for sure, and childcare workers. That's always an issue as well. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a political element to these decisions, and that's why this is going to get super wonky for half a second.
Okay, I'm preparing myself.
You're preparing. So
I'm ready.
The thing is, the legislature can't just say, we want to tinker with these contracts. They have to either say thumbs up or thumbs down, right? So that's why they have to do the furlough thing. They're allowed to just do the furloughs?
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of tinkering.
I mean, that's what I kind of feel like. I mean, I've written stories before that are like, hey, you can't just like pick and choose like little bits of these contracts and change them up. They were already negotiated. You either say yes or you say no. And I'm like, but you can do the furlough thing? I guess that's maybe what they can do.
This is also a little bit wonky, but I just want to ask this. Like last week, Senate Democrats proposed cutting, nearly all state employees' salaries by 5%, which would basically, negate those raises, right? This is tinkering. Staff members at the Attorney General's office walked out to protest the potential cuts. Is it fair to say the legislature is not going to play hardball with the unions, or is this just a scare tactic that the unions will back off from?
All of these budgets are not totally real. Okay, that's the other thing. Like sometimes I forget this because, 10 years ago, I'd be like, I got to write about each of these budgets. And then I'm just like, none of them are real. It's all part of it is negotiate. It is a negotiating position. So, I mean, okay, it's like, well, Bob's over there. This is the governor, Bob. Governor Ferguson is over there saying you need to take 23 furlough days. We're saying just take 13. I mean, that's way better, right? So this is the Senate I'm imitating with my voice right now. And then the House is like, well, we're protecting you guys. And, it's just, yeah, they are all negotiating. They're going to come up with a totally different budget with like 24 hours to go. All of the reporters are going to be mad about it because we won't have any time to look at it. And that will be what they do. And that is what they do. And who knows what they're thinking right now with what they're putting out.
See, I'm not bad because I get to unravel it for like weeks afterwards. That's the benefit of having a newsletter with
but
the wants for
after they
audience.
pass it, I don't love that part. I'm not. How many budget shamey stories can I write? I'm not going to do it anymore. But like you used to have a few days, and now they're just like, hey, here's 4 budgets in one day. Have fun. No one thinks about the reporters anymore. It's fine.
And it is true there has been something of a like real compaction of the process in the budget. Like it used to be that the House would pass the budget and then the Senate would consider it and pass it.
Yeah.
Like on Tuesday night, they were hearing the budget in both fiscal committees, and they're going to pass them. They're going to pass the budget on Saturday.
And the bottom line is if they compact it, if they speed it up really fast, the reporters don't have time to report on it. The public doesn't have time to know about it. The advocates don't have time to organize around it. The walkout people don't have time to organize a walkout around it, all that stuff.
I mean, so it sounds like it's just like, who cares? Woe is me, reporter, right? 4 budgets were released on Monday. I didn't get a chance to look at the transportation budget released by the House at 4:30 p.m. because there's already been 3 budgets that day, and I don't have any more room in my story, so I'm like, I guess I'll just have to look at that later. And I think that is part of what they're doing now. There's fewer press. Here we are.
I do have another it's a budget tax question for Melissa.
Bring it to me.
Because, you've been looking into what...
I did eventually look at the House transportation budget. Eventually.
That's good, because I have a question about it.
Yeah, exactly.
It involves, I'm sorry. Actually, it's not the House transportation, but it's the Senate. Sorry. It's both. It's both of them.
They used to release them on separate days, Scott. Okay? They used to not do this to us. Okay, continue. It's not your fault. It's their fault.
It involves something that makes a lot of people unhappy. We're talking about unpopular things. Gas prices. So what's coming down the metaphorical turnpike?
So both the House and Senate have a gas tax increase in there. I finally had a chance to look at the House budget, and it has a 9-cent gas tax increase. My story only had the Senate gas tax increase saying, they're going to talk about gas taxes. Here's what the Senate's. They're proposing 6 cents per gallon increase in the gas tax. And one thing, and I'm going to ask Paul this, have you ever seen them index gas tax increases to inflation? Because that's in both these two.
I feel like that's new.
So they would raise, it would go up alongside
So it's not going to be
inflation?
6. Yeah, it's not going to be 6 cents for however long until they finally get enough political momentum to pass another transportation package. They're saying, it's going to go up. It's going to be I can't do the math in my head right now. I'm a journalist. But, you know, I mean, it's going to go up by inflation, so a few percent every year. So you're just going to not be sick. It's going to get up to 7 and 8 cents per gallon or something.
And we already have the third highest gas tax in the country. This would push it over 50 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
Setting aside the federal gas tax. And this is the thing that I think, and Melissa, needs to check me on this. I don't think anybody's ever proposed a gas tax this high without really offering some goodies to go with it, because this is really just to bail them out of a really deep hole.
I mean, that usually they're like, look at all these great projects you get across your districts. They'll gather some Republican and Democratic votes because people want their roads fixed. Now it's more like, we don't want to have to cut your projects, and we need to fix all these culverts, which your listeners are aware of from the past episode.
Culvert,
so that's true. The culverts are expensive.
But $8 billion transportation budget shortfall, separate from the $12 billion to $15 billion operating budget shortfall, and half of that $8 billion is just the culverts over the next 6 years. So so they got transportation budget problems.
Yeah.
Also, there's a problem with every single transportation project coming in like 50% over budget. That's a whole other issue. I don't know if it's concrete, steel, whatever. But those two issues combined have created this transportation budget problem.
Yeah, I mean, you got hard hats and hard materials, but the costs of both of those things are going up. So,
we got super wonky in those budgets, but that's what I mean. We got to be able to translate the stuff for you guys, and we aren't getting time to look at it because they're just jamming stuff down our throats.
Which we love, because when I get overwhelmed, I look to your newsletters to tell me everything to fit the world into, again, less than 1,000 words in Axios's part, and 1,800 to 2,000.
Yeah, we're just not as strict as Axios.
Before we go, I want to take a quick moment, jump out of the numbers, jump out of the gas prices.
I would like to, yes, please. Let's do that.
We could all benefit from that. And I want to acknowledge something else that happened after our last episode recorded. Former Speaker of the House Frank Chopp and former Washington Secretary of State Ralph Monroe both passed away last week. They were both longtime staples in Olympia, and their legacies loom really large. Paul, what comes to mind when you think about former Speaker of the House Frank Chopp? What will you remember about him?
So he was just a master of the long game. I mean, he was co-Speaker of the House in a tie with the Republicans when I showed up in 2001 to cover in Olympia. And he restrained the more progressive members of his caucus for years, decades, really, and prevented them from taking politically dangerous votes that would have gotten some of them unelected, and, gradually sort of built the majority that he wanted. And really, it was only in the final couple of years of his life that the kind of progressive policy that Frank Chopp, the extremely liberal Democrat from Fremont in Seattle, was able to, kind of realize the things that he wanted and started to want. And, I think that it's kind of remarkable that his passing probably coincides, within a few weeks with, votes on some of the most aggressive progressive taxation measures, that Washington's ever seen. So,
Yeah, it's interesting. He had this sort of strange relationship with the left of Seattle, the kind of if you want to call them the far left, I don't know. People like Socialist Alternative would often attack him for giving, signing off on the Boeing tax cuts from about a decade ago, which were the largest corporate tax cuts any state had ever given at that point.
Both sets of Boeing tax cuts. There was another one in the early 2000s.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so he had this really uneasy relationship with the left, and he got replaced by a socialist, Sean Scott, a defund the police activist. It's an interesting. It's interesting to look at him that way.
I mean, the thing is, Frank was representing the most liberal district in the state, at least in the 2010s. I used to have a spreadsheet of this from redistricting, and it was 84% Democratic vote. It was up there, the 43rd. And so that's just not what the state is as a whole. So there's always going to be a little tension there because he is dealing with members that are not in that kind of district. And but I think deep in his heart, he started as a homelessness, an advocate for homeless people and housing. I mean, his heart was really in helping people, I think, but he had to play the long game, like you said.
And so, Melissa, you emailed us last night, and moving to Ralph Monroe, former Secretary of State, you said that when you think about him, you think about a whale.
Whales, yes.
Whales.
Plural whales. So this is my colleague, Christine Claridge, who also writes for Axios. We're co-authors, wrote about this the other day. But there's a new baby whale that was sighted the same day Ralph Monroe died last week. And this whale is actually really there because of Ralph Monroe. Because in the 70s, and there's been lots of, you'll see historic photos. In 1976, Ralph Monroe was out on a boat and he saw this whale capture, and it just really sort of imprinted on his heart, right? And he started really advocating for not having orca whales in captivity anymore. So he worked with Dan Evans, who he worked for. He was the governor at the time.
Former Republican governor.
Yeah, and also I think it was Slade Gorton was involved. So all these former Washington officials, Ralph Monroe was also pushing them to sue to get all of the orcas released from captivity. So they sued SeaWorld. Much of it was because Ralph Monroe pushed for this. And one of the whales that got released due to Ralph Monroe's work is the grandmother of this baby whale that we saw the day that Ralph Monroe died.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
People have a lot of legacies. I don't think people think of a Secretary of State, because that's what Ralph Monroe was, as necessarily doing whale stuff,
yeah,
because they're focused on elections and other things, archives. But yeah, there's a whole. It was nice to see a baby whale, I guess, this week. That's all.
Yeah, that's right. We get so caught up in the moment, and I think about how, the news feels so of the moment, especially right now. But when budgets get proposed and passed, especially, those repercussions are felt often for decades. And, we also see our jobs, right, as to return to them and write about their effects even a decade later, right? Because we're certainly still feeling the effects of budget cuts more than a decade ago. And it's also nice to remember that baby whales are being born whose grandmothers were saved many decades ago.
Yeah. It's fun to think about the kind of long arc of politics. I mean, just to be reminded that, not really that long ago, people were literally rounding up orcas in Puget Sound and hauling them off to Southern California and Florida to perform for people. It's. Yeah.
I know the orcas are in bad shape now, but and partly because of that practice. I mean, the effects linger, but at least they're not all at SeaWorld now.
Melissa Santos, you're a reporter with Axios Seattle. Paul Queary, you're the publisher of the Washington Observer. You have both helped me feel way less overwhelmed. Thank you.
Happy to help, Scott.
I'm still overwhelmed, but I'm glad you feel that way.
That's it for Sound Politics today. Today's episode was produced by Sarah Leibovitz. It was edited by Gabriel Spitzer. I'm Scott Greenstone. Thank you for all your calls and emails asking us questions. One more time, share your feedback. soundpolitics@kuow.org. Or call us. Leave us a good old-fashioned voicemail at 206-221-0511. And we will see you next week.